Well, let's see if we can fix that. Okay, welcome to the Explainer. We're going to dive right into a massive solution for those sales pains, and it all starts with this monumental number. 35,000. That is the staggering amount of real-world sales calls that researcher Neil Rackham and his team analyzed back in the 1980s. They wanted to decode what top performers were actually doing. No fluffy theory here. They literally spent years shadowing reps at enterprise giants just to figure out the exact anatomy of a winning sale. And well, the payoff really speaks for itself. Reps who were trained in the methodology that came out of this research saw a massive 17% jump in their sales volume. We aren't just talking about a lucky month. We're talking about a complete data-backed transformation in win rates. Here's our roadmap for decoding all of this today. First, the 35,000 calls secret. Second, the 4 stages of selling. Third, the spin question framework itself. Fourth, how to avoid common spin pitfalls. And finally, spin versus other sales methodologies. Section 1. The 35,000 call secret. Decoding the data. Check out this fundamental quote from Neil Rackham. The big takeaway here is that top performers absolutely do not pitch harder. Instead, they act like trusted advisors who uncover problems they can actually solve. Because if there's no problem, there's no sale, period. The data totally proved that average reps pitch features way too early. You know the drill. They show up and throw up. But top performers? They use a highly specific pattern of questions to guide buyers from just a vague awareness of a problem to taking definitive action. It's a complete mindset shift from talking to strategically asking. Section 2. 4 stages of selling. The anatomy of a sale. Almost every successful B2B sale follows these 4 stages. Opening to establish credibility. Investigating to uncover the real pain. Demonstrating capability to present your fix. And obtaining commitment for that next step. Now, here's the kicker. The absolute best reps spend 60 to 70% of their time right there in the investigating stage. They deeply understand the pain way before they ever start showing off their product. Section 3. The spin framework. Structuring questions. All right, let's break down the acronym. The S stands for situation questions. Basically, your fact-finding inquiries. Now, while you need them to get your bearings, you really got to use these sparingly. Why? Because they do absolutely zero to create value for your prospect and can drain their patience super fast. Remember, these questions are for your benefit, not theirs. For example, asking something like, how are your reps currently logging activity in Salesforce? Listen, always do your homework beforehand. You should only be dropping situation questions to fill in factual gaps that you absolutely couldn't find online yourself. That brings us to the P, problem questions. These are highly targeted questions to identify difficulties, frustrations, or process gaps. Once you've got the context, you use these to surface specific pain points that your buyer might have just kind of accepted as normal everyday annoyances. So asking a head of RevOps, where do you see the biggest gaps in your pipeline data today, is so much more effective than the classic generic, what keeps you up at night? It forces them to focus on a specific friction point and, frankly, admit that their current process has a problem. Okay, next up is the I for implication questions. And I gotta say, this is where the magic really happens. Rookie reps hear a problem and immediately jump to their solution. But the pros, they use implication questions to build out the severe consequences of that problem. They quantify the cost and the risk to induce a very real sense of urgency. Just look at the power of this one. If your forecast is off by 20%, How does that affect headcount and resource allocation? Boom. When the buyer actually hears themselves explain how bad data leads to messed up hiring and lost revenue, the motivation to change comes entirely from within. You aren't pushing them at all. They're realizing the danger of the status quo all on their own. And that brings us to the final piece, the N, for need-payoff questions. This is where you gracefully flip the conversation so the buyer basically pitches the solution to themselves. Instead of you bragging about why your product is the best, you just ask questions that prompt them to articulate the value of solving their own problem. Take a look at this. If your team had real-time pipeline data without manual entry, how would that change your forecast process? Notice how that paints a picture of the solved state, not your specific product. By asking this, you're letting the prospect take full ownership of the payoffs. They are literally telling you exactly why they need to buy. Section 4. Avoiding spin pitfalls. Common mistakes. The contrast here is literally the difference between crushing your quota and losing the deal. The average rep asks endless situation questions, completely skips the vital implication stage, and uses need-payoff just to pitch features. Meanwhile, the top performer does their pre-call research, zeroes in on implication to build real urgency, and lets the buyer define the value. Look, if you treat spin like a rigid script or try to force it onto fast transactional deals, it's going to backfire. But using it as a fluid mental model for discovery, that's how you win. Section 5. Spin versus other methods. Modern sales stack. Keep in mind, high-performing sales orgs don't just pick one methodology and call it a day. It's like a toolkit. They might use Challenger to teach and reframe, Spin to expertly run that discovery conversation, and then Medic to qualify the deal for accurate forecasting. Basically, Spin is your ultimate engine for running flawless discovery. Ultimately, mastering all this means you have to step away from the comfort zone of just feature dumping. You have to embrace a genuinely consultative approach to creating value. It's really about becoming an absolute expert in your buyer's problems, rather than just being an expert in your own product. So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought and a bit of a challenge. Grab 5 active deals from your pipeline today and craft the exact questions that will help those buyers convince themselves to buy. How are you going to use implication and need-payoff questions to completely change the dynamic of those conversations? Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer. Now get out there and start asking the questions that actually matter.